Hello, I'm Crafty Patti, and as you can see, I've been doing lots of knitting so I could bring to you this wonderful knitting video that you can knit slippers for the whole family, dad, mom, children's, and little tiny toddlers. This is one thing I've added to this pattern, and I've worked out how to make a little one because in my other slipper pattern, it didn't have little toddler sizes. So you'll get that. Now, we'll also explain to you how you can make it any width or any length, and you can vary it to fit your shoe size or whoever you're knitting for. This slipper can also be worn all the way up like so, or leave it down with the cuff like this. And you don't need to look very far for the pattern because it will be in the description box right below this video. You'll see that little arrow or you'll see the word show more. Just click on that and you'll see the pattern there for yourselves. Okay, let's get to it and let's start knitting. Today I'm using Bernat Softee Chunky by Yarnspirations. This yarn is a super bulky number 6, a number 8mm needle. But because I like to have a firm slipper, I go down in size and I use the 6mm needles. This particular ball of yarn, it does have 108 yards, and I will describe on how much yarn you need for each size. We're doing the ladies right now, and you can almost get a pair of slippers out of one ball of yarn, but you're very, very close. You only have about 2 yards to spare. So I would suggest you get the 2 balls for the ladies. And as I said, I will be using these 6mm needles, or this would be a US 10, or it would be a UK 4. I like to use a sewing knitting gauge when I'm measuring for my knitting projects, but if you don't have one, you can use a tape measure. And of course, a pair of scissors to cut your yarn. And I like to use a dull end darning needle to sew in my yarn ends. And I happen to have these little tiny pins that I use for a knitting marker, so you can use those. If you don't have one of those, you can simply use a bobby pin. And as I mentioned before, this full pattern will be in the description box below the video, so you won't have to look for it. Now I have made up this pattern to fit a toddler, child, lady, or men's size slipper. So what I've done is I've made up a little chart here so you can vary the size and you can knit it to the exact size that you want. I've given you the approximate length of an actual foot size, and that will help you determine what size to make your slipper. And then I've given you an approximation of what the actual finished size of the slipper is here, and the shoe size, which might come in handy for you. This is what your knitted section will look like before you sew it up. This is actually the wrong side, and you can see the knit rows, and this is the correct side, and you can see the little raised bumps here made by the purl and the knit stitches, and that's the toe section up here. This gives you a little bit more padding for the bottom of your slipper. By changing up the number of cast-on stitches and the number of times we repeat our toe section, it will give us the different sizing for a toddler, child's, and this is our man's slipper. We're going to be knitting the lady's slipper together. Now remember that the cast-on number of stitches will determine the width of your slipper, because we're going to take away 10 stitches on each side, so what's left will form your width. Now, if you need to alter this, then you just start by casting on less stitches or more stitches. Make sure that you're on an odd number though. So like say 31, 33, 35. Now this is why I'm saying that you can vary this sizing depending on how much you knit this section and how much you knit this section to knit the size of slipper that you want. So as you'll see on the pattern, that for any size, I have decreased 10 stitches on both sides here because that's the amount that we're getting to create the cuff section of our slipper. This section here is going to give you the depth you need to get your foot in the slipper. So like this one here for the little toddler slipper, when you bring this together, this is forming your slipper like this. So this is going to be the section that you need to be able to get your little foot in. So obviously you need a larger hole for ladies, a larger hole for men's, and a smaller for the little toddler. So by varying the amount of stitches, the amount of rows that you knit this way will determine the amount you need for your foot to get in. If you want it shorter, then don't repeat it as many times as I did. I repeated my first row 1 and 2 3 times. You can just do it 2 times or even just 1 time if you've got a smaller foot. If you want this longer, then you would keep doing it 2 more rows. So I just want to explain again for those that want to vary the pattern at all. Again, your cast on stitches is going to create enough for your cuff, but it's also going to give you enough that when this is sewed together, this is going to give you your width of your foot. So let's get started with the actual knitting. I will go nice and slow so a beginner can learn how to knit these for the first time. If you're a more advanced knitter, then of course you can just fast forward and get to the next section, or by all means just look at the pattern and knit up the slippers on your own. But for those that need the extra help, keep watching and we'll knit this together. Have a look at both ends of your yarn, and hopefully if you're lucky you'll get an end where you can see that there's a loose end, and there it is. So I find if you're going to knit from the middle of your ball, it's much easier because then your ball isn't rolling all over the place and it's easier to knit. You'll want to pull out approximately 2 feet of your yarn, and then you don't have to add yarn later to sew up your seam. You'll already have it ready to go. Take your yarn and you're just going to bring it up and you're making a little loop. Here's the top yarn and there's the underneath yarn. Once you've made your loop, you're going to reach inside and you're going to grab that tail and you're going to bring it up like so. Now you're going to take these 2 ends and you're going to slip it up. And the reason it's called a slip knot is because when you put it on your needle, you can take your yarn and it will slip up, and therefore you have a slip knot. Now, I do a knitted cast on. There are different ways of doing cast on stitches. You do what's best for you, but if you want to learn how to do a knitted cast on, then keep watching. You have your slip knot on the left needle, and now we're going to insert the right needle into that slip knot like so. Now for you beginner knitters, the one thing that you'll learn is tension makes for a really nicely knitted pair of slippers. So for the tension, what I like to do is I take my baby finger and I wrap the yarn around my baby finger like so. And then I come up and this index finger comes under the yarn, and that's what I control my tension with. So if I've got my fingers closed tight, it won't move. If I ease up, the yarn just slides through and it gives me a nice tension. So let's start our first cast on. So we're going to wrap our yarn around that back needle or our right needle. We're going to bring that needle down and we're going to form the loop on the right needle. You've now made another stitch. To keep going, to make more cast on stitches, you bring the left needle into that right stitch you've just formed, and then we're going to wrap the yarn around the right needle, bring it down, and let that needle catch it and make another loop. And now you've made 2 stitches. Let's do that again. Trying to go nice and slow for you. Into that stitch, take your yarn, wrap it around the right needle, bring it down, and form that loop. And now you can see you've made 3 cast on stitches. The cast on makes a nice edge. So you're going to carry on, and you're going to cast on 45 stitches if you are doing the lady slipper, or look on the pattern and it will tell you how many stitches to cast on for the slipper that you would like to knit. This is number 43. This is going to be number 44. And to make 45, you just slip this over to your left needle and you now have 45 stitches. Now you need to go back and count all these stitches and make sure that you have 45. So you can just count by 2s. 2. So that's 40, 42, 44, and 45. So we're ready to do our first row of knitting. Now I just want to show you something first. You see how that last stitch, that's when we just popped onto the needle, is got this little twist over this stitch. So if you take that off and you turn it so your needle goes in this way, it makes a better stitch. So I don't know if you could see that, if it made a difference. And placing your right needle into that first stitch on the left needle, again using that nice tension, and we're going to wrap our yarn around that right needle, and now we're going to make that loop, but instead of that cast on, we're actually going to let that come right, this stitch, right off the needle. You've now made your first knit stitch. Let's come into the next stitch and wrap your yarn around and off the left needle. Do one more for you, nice and slow. And off the left needle. So I think hopefully you've got that. Continue and knit the whole row. And here's our last 2 stitches. Put your right needle into your left hand, and now you've got no stitches on the right needle. Let's start row number 2, which is now going to be starting with a purl stitch, and then we're going to repeat the pattern, knit 1 and purl 1. This time for a purl stitch, your needle is going to come in front rather than the back. So now, placing your needle into the stitch, like so, you're still going to pass your yarn around the needle and then slide it down and slide it off. You've now made your first purl stitch. Now you're going to bring your yarn, and it needs to come to the back of your right needle again to start your knit stitch. Now your needle is going to go to the back. Again, wrap around and off. You've made your knit. Now we're going to go back to a purl. You need to bring your yarn to the front of the needle, and you're going to place your needle to the front of this needle. Again, wrap around and off. And to do your knit stitch, you've got to bring your yarn back to the back again. And you're ready for a knit. You're going to repeat purl 1, knit 1 across to the end of the row. If you lose track if you're knitting a purl or a knit stitch, then you can tell by looking at your knitted stitches. If you can see here, you'll see the knits have got the little V, and your purl has got the horizontal line on the top. So you've got a knit and a purl. There's a knit and a purl. And for row 2 in this section, you're always going to start with a purl stitch. And for your end of your row, it'll always end on a purl stitch. So you'll know if you've ended on a purl, you've got it right. And here's our last stitch for our purl. And so because we're repeating rows 1 and 2 now, our first row is all knit stitches again. So back to just all knit stitches. And I'll keep repeating rows 1 and 2 until I have my 4.5 inches, and we'll meet you back there. If you can't remember if you're doing a row 1 or a row 2, this is what your row 1 looks like, and you'll have a knit going all the way up like that. And then on this side is where you get all those cute little bumps or bobbles, whatever you want to call them. And this is your purl 1, knit 1 side of knitting. You want to end on this side when you get to your 4.5 inches if you're doing a lady slipper. Just about to finish my row 2, and I'm on a knit stitch. And again, last stitch is a purl. And I'm ending on my purl. So let's turn this over and let's give it a measure. And when you're measuring, you don't include your needle, but just come right below your needle, and you can see now that we have 4.5 inches. Starting on your knit side, we are now going to decrease 10 stitches. So inserting your needle into our first stitch here, we're going to knit that first stitch, and now we need to knit a second stitch. And now to decrease, we put our needle into that first knit stitch. You can hold down with your fingers like this if that's easier for you, just so you don't lose that stitch. And then holding down here, you're going to bring this stitch over the needle and over that first stitch. And there you have one cast off. You've done one. Let's do another one. Knit the stitch. Again, needle into that first stitch, hold down, and then let's slip that other stitch over. We've done 2. And number 3. Now I'm using my tension to hold down by squeezing my fingers in here, and so I don't have to worry about losing that stitch, but I just gave you another option on how you can do that. So I'm just doing it that way. All right, so we're going to make sure we do 10 in total. Because I'm talking and knitting at the same time, I don't want to lose count. So I'm just going to put my little stitch marker right in here, and that will tell me where I have to stop my decrease. I've counted all my stitches here, and this is number 35. So because we want 35 stitches left on the needle, we need to do one more. Because this one's going to come off. Now this stitch plus all of these should count to 35. And I've just taken off my stitch marker. I don't need that anymore. And what we're going to do now is we're going to just knit right to the end of the row. And my last 2 knit stitches for this side. And now we're ready to turn this around. And now we're going to do decrease of 10 stitches on our purl knit side. And now to make it easier to keep track, I'm going to place my stitch marker on number 11. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So we're going to place it on this one right here. Now to keep you going in the same pattern, purl 1, knit 1, we're going to do the purl 1, knit 1 and decrease at the same time. So let's start with a purl stitch. And a knit stitch. And now we're going to take that first stitch and pull it over that second knit stitch that we made. Now, being that we're working in a purl knit pattern, we need to bring this back for the next purl. So we're going to purl a stitch. Now don't worry about this. If it's easier for you just to pull it up to the front here, that's fine. And then you can grab onto your needle here if you want. And then holding onto your thread here so you don't lose this stitch. And you're going to bring this one over. Bringing it back again to get ready for a knit. And again, and decreasing by pulling that over and back for a purl. And here's my marker. We're going to go into that one for the purl. And at this point in time, if you don't trust yourself on how many you've taken off, then counting this one as well, make sure you go back and make sure you now have 25 stitches on your needle, including this stitch. Once you've counted and you're sure that you've got your 25 stitches, you now know that this was your last purl. So we're back to the knit and carry on to the end of the row with your purl 1, knit 1 pattern. And if you've done it right, your next 2 stitches, there's your knit, and your last stitch, as always, will be a purl. And there's what we've got so far. Cast off 10 here, 25 stitches in the middle and cast off 10 on this side. And now we're back on the knit side because we're starting our rows 1 and 2 again. So our first row again is all knits after we do our decreasing. And so we're going to continue our rows 1 and our rows 2 until the total measurement measures 6 inches, and that is for a lady's sizing. And again, when you've got the measurement that you need, you do want to end on your purl knit side. And this is my last 2 stitches here, ending on a purl. So let's measure this. And for the ladies, we want to have 6 inches again below your needle, and there's our 6 inches. We are now going to start the toe section. And what I did was I made up a little handy chart, and you don't have to do it on the computer. You can just freehand this on a piece of paper and with a pencil, which is fine. What I'm doing is I'm just telling you that we're going to do rows 1 and 2. And then for a toddler, we repeat rows 1 and 2 1 time, children's 2 times, lady 3 times, and men 4 times. So every time you do a row, I do a check mark. And then it just keeps track of where you're at. And I find that's helpful for me, and you might want to do the same. So let's start row 1 for our toe section. Because we ended on our purl knit side, we are now starting our toe section on the knit side. So for our toe section, we are now going to do ribbing, but this time we're going to start our first stitch with a knit. So we're going to do knit 1 and purl 1. And that's our pattern across the row. Knit 1, purl 1, ribbing. And knit 1 and purl 1. And continue across the row, and I will see you at the end. For the toe section, we started with the knit and we're going to end with the knit. So the next stitch here for me is a purl, and our last stitch is now a knit. And we're going to turn that around, and this is where I use my just handy dandy little chart, and this is our first 2 rows. So I'm just going to say that I have done my first row, and I'm going to do my second row starting with purl. And here we are starting our second row of our toe section, starting with a purl this time. So purl and a knit, and continue that. Purl 1, knit 1, ribbing across to the end of the row. And for row 2 of our toe section, we started with a purl, and we're going to end with the purl. So now you're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 for the ladies 3 more times. And so every time you've finished a row, use your little cheat sheet to check it off, and then if you get distracted, you'll know exactly where you're at. So there's my first 2 rows, and I'm going to do it 1, 2, 3 more times. And I've now repeated rows 1 and 2 3 more times for the ladies' sizing. Now remember, you want this length here to be a little bit smaller than your actual foot size, because you want it to stretch a little bit. If you knit it exactly the same size as your foot, it's going to slop around and it's not going to feel snug on your foot. We finished our last row, and now we're just going to measure out a rough estimate of to 2.5 feet, just enough that you can sew up your seams. So we'll cut off our yarn. And now get your large-eyed dull darning needle. And the easiest way is to place your yarn right over the eye of the needle, pull down quite hard, squish it down with your thumb and finger, slide it off, and then place the eye of the needle right over your yarn, and it will easily come through the hole for you. Once you've got it threaded, your next step is we're going to take our stitches that are on our needle, and you can take about 4 or 5 at a time, depends on what you want to do, whatever you're comfortable with. But you're just going to bring your needle in, and I'm going to grab 5 of them here. And then just pull that through, and then just let those slide off the needle, being careful not to lose your other stitches on the needle. And continue until you've got all your stitches off your needle. And you can take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, it doesn't matter how many you take at one time. It doesn't matter, as long as you just get them off. And that's my last one, so I can take my needle off. And now you've got them all threaded on with your yarn. Now what I like to do is come back to find your first stitch that you've brought your wool through with, and this will make it easier to have a nice tight circle. So here's my first one. So I'm going to come back through, and now we can pull these all to our first stitch down in here. And this is where we've got it going back through our first stitch again. And the reason I did this is because when you pull this all tight now, it will cinch up really nice and tight for you, so you don't have a hole right here. So just continue to just cinch it up as tight as you can by pulling on the yarn here, and then pulling through that first stitch again until you don't have a hole. Then just come into the next stitch again, and this time leave a loop and bring your yarn through that loop, and that will tie that off. And now come through your next stitch in the round there, and let's tie one more knot to make sure that's nice and secure and it's not going to go anywhere. Putting it through that loop again, and then tying that off once more, holding that knot right down to the base. And now we're ready to come in, and we're going to sew up our instep and up the booty and up to the cuff. To get a nice clean edge on the top here, I like to find where my last stitch is on both sides, and place my little pin in here, and place the pin in here, and then that's going to stay nice and even, and then you can work your way up to that edge. So here you can see your V's, and on here you can see your V's. So we're going to actually just go into the V, this part of the V that's closest to the center. Here's our last stitch right here. So I'm going to come in to this one here and this one right here. Now don't pull really tight, because that's going to distort your slipper and make it all snug up, and it will get all out of shape. You don't want that. So there, we've gone through those ones. Here's our next one, through here, through here. And here's our next two, right here and right here. And keep working your way up your slipper. And when you get to this part of your slipper, you'll see it even more clear, where you can see your V's on both sides. Again, just take it from the inside V's, from this one and into this one. And into the next two, and work your way up to the top. And I've sewn all the way up to the top, and here's our last two that we've matched up. So you want to go through those last two, leave a loop. Let's take off our little mark pin here, and then come through that loop, and then just bring that down. Now don't pull that too tight, because you want that to be going straight across, so there's no dip. I'm going to come back down into this next loop right here, this next stitch, and I'm going to make one more loop to secure that. And then pass it through the loop again. That will keep it good and strong. Bring it down, pulling but not really tight, because you want a nice clean edge on the top here. And then once you've done that, you're just going to bring your yarn and weave it through a few stitches up here on the top here. Again, don't pull it tight. Pull it up again so you don't distort that top edge. And then come back up just to finish it off. Again, don't pull tight and squish, like pull it down again. And then you can cut off that yarn and you're finished sewing up the instep. And now let's sew up the back of the slipper. And again, thread your needle with the yarn that you've left to sew up the back side of the slipper. Here's this side, and I'm going to come over to this side here. And again, don't pull too tight, because you want to have a really nice edge on the top here where it doesn't dip down. Now on the back side, instead of coming into the inside ones, we're going to grab the outside ones, because if we just grab this one, it's going to leave some bulk here, and that's not going to be comfortable on the on your slipper. So now we're going to just like fold it right up like that, and then you're going to look for those edge loops, and that's where you're going to sew it. Find the next two loops. And the next two, and go all the way along. Again, don't pull too tight, because it will distort it and you'll get it all shrinking up, and you don't want that. When you get down to the heel of your slipper, this is where you can come in and you can pull just that little tiny bit tighter on your last two stitches. Forming your loop, needle through the loop, and then cinch that up, and you can pull on the tighter side for that portion. And it just makes a little bit of a rounding for your heel. Let's come through one more time. Make sure that's good and secure. Making another loop and passing it through the loop. Now you can just bring your hand inside your slipper, and we're just going to come back up through some of these stitches. Give it a tug, and then skipping this one stitch and then starting the next one, and then come back again. And give it a tug again to release it, and then you can cut it off. You've got your slipper all sewn up, and now we're going to reverse it to the correct side, which is this side. And there's your slipper. You can leave it up like this, or you can turn it down and make a cuff, whatever you desire. There you go. Now knit another one exactly the same.